I'm Susan Legacki with TrainingPeaks, and I'm here right now with Eduardo della Maggiora, an age group athlete doing Kona on Saturday, as well as his coach, Michael Lovato, who will also be doing IRONMAN Live commentating this year. So Eduardo has a really interesting story that you can learn more about on our website right now at trainingpeaks.com/Kona. So Eduardo got into triathlon just a few years ago, kind of on a whim. He signed up for Phenom 70.3 and realized pretty quickly that he was pretty darn good at it. And he's already gone sub 9 hours in an Ironman. This will be his second Kona, but it will be his first time qualifying. His first time in Kona, he actually made it on the lottery. And it was only his second or third triathlon ever was Kona a few years ago. So he's back here now with a coach, living in Boulder, kind of living the dream. And so Eduardo, tell me a little bit about how your expectations for this Kona different from your first time around, and how your training has kind of changed since bringing on Michael as a coach.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. I would say it's like 36, like 180 degrees different. Mm-hmm. Like the first time I was here, I was totally scared. I didn't know like what I was getting into. I remember being in the island and everyone was like, "So where did you qualify?" And I was like, "No, I won the lottery." "Wow, you're lucky. So how many years have you been doing triathlon?" No, only 4 or 5 months." "What? Okay, so how many Ironmans have you done?" None. This is my first." "Okay, and how many other races?" "Well, I've done a 70.3, an Olympic distance, and a sprint before this, and this is my 4th race." And everyone would look at me and they would be like, "Oh, you're up for a really big day." So all the lead up to the race was pretty. My goal there was just to finish. I would say my training was not half as complete as the one I had now. I didn't have the base. I mean, I only done 170.3, and the focus of that training was just to finish the race. Right. I'd never done a marathon. I've never biked, 112 miles. So it was completely different to what I'm doing now, right? And my body wasn't prepared for it either, so I didn't want to push things either, so I took it, step by step. I didn't want to put volumes that pros were doing, or I just did stuff that was beginner stuff, right? But at the same time focused on Kona, which was a strange mix, because I had to combine two things. So I made it to the start line without injuries. That was my focus number one, because like putting all the volume, like I'd never trained those volumes, and I finished the race in a pretty decent time, and I really loved the experience. And I said to myself, when I finish that race, I'm gonna come back, and when I'm back and people ask me where you qualified, I'm gonna tell them where I qualified, not in lotteries.
Right. Awesome. That's really cool. It's really cool. So
people actually want to know what the time was, though. I can see the comments flashing across the bottom of our screen right now.
So the time was 10 hours and 12 minutes.
For your first Ironman.
Yeah. 12 hours and 12 minutes.
Holy moly. So, Michael.
Yes.
As his coach, and you have a lot of athletes who've done this race. You've done this race several times. So, just for the psychological aspects of this, like, what's your main kind of, I guess, advice that you give to somebody like Eduardo, who's obviously here to be competitive, but at the same time you want them to take it all in? Like, what's your kind of your biggest like psychological sort of like, this is how to get in the right mind frame for this race?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a lot of what I try and do is gradually easing in. We've met, talked about the race, we've exchanged a number of emails, so it's kind of like gradually dosing in the information, because I think overwhelming an athlete with my thoughts is too much. He's got a lot going on. He's a smart guy. He reads a lot. He studies a lot. So I don't want to overdo it in that regard. I think the biggest problem with Kona is that picture he painted is very typical. It's very overwhelming. And so just kind of trying to help contribute to a little bit more laid back, make my standard round of dumb jokes and try and remember, so he has a laugh, and we don't get too uptight, and then we'll meet tomorrow, some more specific stuff, ways to handle, like really concrete ways to just kind of stay positive. But in the end, I think remembering that really truly this race, it's no different than the stuff you've trained for and prepared for. So if you go out there expecting a miracle, you're most likely going to be disappointed. If you go out there expecting this, some massive like 8:20 or something. I don't know, with 7:50. But if you go out there and just do what you want to do, express all that hard work and training, then you have a great day. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
So your background, Eduardo, you were an engineer, and so obviously pretty data focused, and you came into TrainingPeaks pretty early on in the process, understanding that was kind of what worked for you. So I know, so you raced 70.3 Worlds not too long ago, and you told me that you really kind of gave that race like your all. So there's not like a whole lot of time between Chattanooga and Kona. So what metrics are you looking at? Like what were you paying attention to, just numbers wise? I guess obviously working with Michael, but how are you kind of factoring all that in to make sure that you arrived here in Kona not still fatigued from that, or still with enough training under your belt?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, as you mentioned, like World 70.3 and Kona are pretty much together. So that has, how I see it, it has a good side and a bad side, training wise. The good side is that when you have a 70.3 5 weeks before Kona, you have some time where you taper before the race, and after the race you also have some sort of rest days or days that you're not going to train so hard. So that gives you a sort of a break or a taper per se, and the race itself is a pretty good training day, right? So what I looked, and what we've been looking with Michael is, and going specifically to numbers, is seeing the fatigue and the fitness, how it's building up. So just like for Chattanooga, what we did was look the PMC, right, leading up to Chattanooga, I don't know, a week, 10 days before, and then starting to take off some fatigue to get fresh to the race, right? And then start to build up fitness again 3-4 days after 70.3. We did some pretty solid training blocks, I would say, after pretty solid training blocks.
Yeah, you're getting some long rides there. Yeah, some long rides.
We had like a 10-day where I told Michael, really, we're gonna do this. But looking back to it, it was pretty good, because it's giving me the confidence, as Michael said, to do what I want to do here in Kona, and those 10 or 12 days that we did, those blocks helped a lot to get the fitness really up. Of course, the fatigue would go up as well, but now in the last week or so, we've been shedding that off and trying to get to peak form on Saturday.
Yeah, awesome. So Michael.
Yes.
So you had kind of an interesting process with Eduardo as an athlete, because he quit his job for a while, took a sabbatical to move to Boulder and start training with you, like a professional triathlete would. So that's from a coach's perspective. How did you know that he was the right athlete for you to take on in that respect, and what have you kind of learned along this process in terms of just how to sort of craft someone into, possibly top level nature, possibly pro? Yeah,
well, it's to me it's a couple years project. To me, everything is like, you've got to look at 3 years. I mean, 2 years is you can do a lot. A year you can do, typically you can make some changes and get better. But so I was always right away thinking, well, what does he need to do to get to somewhere pretty cool in 3 years? Most athletes, you see that's a natural or necessary block of time. But what was awesome, and when he came to me, for me, what was exciting is I looked at the kind of the personality and will we get along? We talked on the phone beforehand when we first met, and so are we going to get along? Are we compatible? Because some people in that scenario you described aren't the type of people I want to work with, and it's like, well, I don't really have time to have someone that's quit his job and trying to be the best, but he's a jerk.
Right.
So I mean, let's be honest, there's some people like that. So I really liked that right away. I could tell he's a likable guy. He was referred by an athlete I've been working with for 4 years now, and so that went a long way. She said he's just a really hard-working guy. He gets the lottery, so he's lucky, but he works hard, so he doesn't go in there and get the lottery and do 12 and a half hours. He still works hard and does well. So it's like, okay, he's willing to work. He's a nice guy, and he's like, he's open to it. He told me, I think one time he's read 160 books, 180 books.
Yep.
He's read a number of books that I didn't even know existed that cover the sport of triathlon.
He's a numbers guy.
Exactly. I mean, So that was, and it's like, it's a new, there's a couple times when you're a coach, you say, here's my strength, here's my strength, here's a weakness, and here's something that's just a fun new challenge. And I think that Eduardo really sits in the middle of all that, because because he is very unique in that regard, and it's a great new challenge. I've learned a lot just as far as he's good. He could ask me a ton of questions and say, this sounds crazy, what you're having me do is nothing I've done before, or he could just say, all right, I trust you, I'm going to do it. And so I think as long as I have an answer for why we're doing it, Eduardo's on board.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Michael that for me it's super important, like for everyone out there, like it's something that's very specific about the sport is that it's not you're not gonna get a game after 4 months or 5 months, right? I just moved to Boulder in May, and I want to do really well in Kona, and I want to do really well in the next. But I really share with Michael that this is like a really long-term project, and it's a very particular thing about, I think, the sport.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
last question for you. You use Best Bike Split as well. So have you guys already kind of factored in your plan, or is there anything about that you would share, how you're going to use it, how you're going to kind of help that with your pacing or anything along those lines?
I'll actually let Michael answer this one. Because he's been playing with, I think, different scenarios. We were just talking about that coming here. For Chattanooga, as I mentioned last time we met, it was really helpful because Michael played out a couple scenarios, and not only a couple scenarios, but different scenarios within the 90K split into different segments. And
it was a really tough course.
And it was a really tough course, so it was really useful for that. So here for Kona, I guess we're going to do the same, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he has to defer because I've been hoarding it. I hold it back. It's like, well, for one, I love Best Bike Splits. I love the way you can use it a number of different ways. And to me, to just put the thing in and send them and say, there you go, follow it, it's not as valuable. So I run usually 2 or 3 scenarios, and then I take pieces from each one, and then I put together like an email that says, and we did that for the first 8K in Chattanooga, the power you should see, the kind of effort, and then for the climb, and then for the ensuing part, and then the last part. And Kona's Kona's terrain is, in a lot of ways, it's similar to Chattanooga, where you start out with a lot of hard work, and then, but really when you want to be strong is at the end. And so, and a lot depends on the dynamic. So we'll give him some scenarios. Let's say he comes out and he can't get away from a train. That changes the power numbers dramatically. So but it's a neat, how fast can he go and how much power can he push? That's something that you could almost do on your own and just say, well, like, I think if he went out there and rode, he can break 5 hours and push about 263 watts. But whether or not he does that, he may, we're not sure. So.
Well, we're going to find out.
Yep. Pretty soon.
Pretty soon on Saturday. So good luck to you.
Thank you.
And good luck to you.
Thank you.
On Saturday as well with all the commentating. TrainingPeaks will actually be providing some analysis on race day with Ironman, Ironman.com. You can go there for all race day coverage as well, and go to our Kona page at TrainingPeaks.com/Kona to learn more about Eduardo and his journey from a financier and philanthropist to a budding possible pro triathlete. So thank you guys.